is out of town today, so I am the lower level functionary who will be running the meeting today. And so I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I believe we have a quorum, so I think that we can do that. So I'm going to go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Kevin Walker, and I'm representing the citizens at large.
Hal Moffett, El Paso County.
John Dick, General Monument.
Cameron Butler, City of Palm Springs.
David Walker, City of Manatee Springs.
Ellen Hussey, Teller County.
Vince Rusinack, citizen at large.
Fran Pitaro, Colorado Springs.
Al Creeley, citizen at large.
Bob Baker, El Paso County.
Sharon Brown, Bell.
Paul Johnson, Colorado Springs.
Right, Armstrong, 81 voters.
Courtney Stone, citizen at large.
Rob?
Ron McDonald, Director of PPACG.
Keep going. To his right.
I'm Jennifer Valentine. I started about a month ago, so I think I just missed your last meeting, but I'm one of two new transportation planners for the
I'm Kevin Reyes. I'm the other transportation planner for PPACG, and I just started with them.
Angela Essing, I'm the joint land use study manager.
Greg Casper, disembodied voice.
And?
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County.
Terry Chavez.
To
And?
my voice.
And you're last.
Rachel Beck, Policy and Communication Manager.
Okay. That's item 2, consent items. I am going to cause both of these to be discussed briefly. In the agenda approval, I just wondered if there was any update from the bylaws committee, subcommittee, that we need to find a place on the agenda for.
We're meeting the 7th of April.
Okay, so we don't need to talk about it this time?
No.
Okay, great. Then we'll just leave that. And are there any other questions on the agenda? Any questions on the minutes? I have one change to the minutes in item, where are they? In item 5, Sterling Ranch wastewater site application, I would like to note that I was excused during that item. So while it was unanimous, I was not in the room.
I made a note of that, and I will fix that.
Okay. Given those two, that modification, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, do we have any?
Staying, I was not here, so.
You went there? Okay. Item 3, public comments. Any items on the agenda, not on the agenda, to have commentary on? Yes, ma'am. Rachel?
I just want to introduce you all to Anna Stevens, who is sitting in the corner over there.
Oh, we forgot to have her introduce herself. Sorry
As
about
you
that.
know, Jacqueline is now working for City Council, and so Anna will be supporting your committee going forward.
Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I have a question. Are all of the microphones turned on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Yes, sir. Mr. Baker.
I have a question. John, could you speak about what's going on out in the monument politically, or maybe you don't want to? Resignation of the mayor? Or, it's in the paper
I
today.
don't have a lot of information about it. I serve on the planning commission for the town, and there seemed to, at one point a month ago, there seemed to have been kind of a rush to annex a piece of property to the town that happened to be owned by the mayor. And so it was assumed that that move would allow him to continue to serve as mayor, because he intended to move there after the renovation of the house that was on the property, because he'd have to live in the town of Monument. But today's paper indicated that he's resigning, but I have no idea, I mean, other than the fact he stated that he's taking a job. His employers insisted that he resign his position as mayor due to a possible conflict of interest. But I don't even know where he's going to be working. That wasn't announced.
There's a group of 4 that are running for the city
Oh.
council.
Yeah,
Aligned and
yeah, that's a result of the hubbub over the
methadone.
methadone clinic that was proposed to be in the town, and apparently that group of four feels that the Board of Trustees is not responsive to the people, and I don't know, it may be simply a result of the mood in the country nowadays that, we need to shake things up or something. I don't know, but I think their personal opinion, they're overreacting a great deal, and I hope they're not successful, but that's my point of view.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, item number 4, March 9th Board of Directors report. I was there for a little while and gave our report, and I do know that the bylaws subcommittee was approved. So I know that we had already met, or the group had already met, but they gave their official blessing. Other than that, I will defer to Rachel to give you a quick report on the remainder of the Board of Directors meeting.
It was a pretty quick meeting. The board did approve the Woodland Park wastewater treatment plant expansion, which you all have heard a couple of times and recommended that they approve. We heard some updates from CDOT on the Fillmore and I-25 project, which at the time was almost completed. The full completion will probably be early this summer. Maybe some of you have driven over the Diverging Diamond interchange. That happened, I think, this weekend. We also heard some updates on I-25 and Cimarron. The road closures related to the current phase of that project are going to last about 3 months. Let's see. More new staff was introduced. Jennifer Valentine, one of our new transportation planners, and since we're talking about new transportation planners, sitting next to her is Kevin Reyes. He was not at the board meeting, but we'll introduce him too. So welcome to them also. Let's see what else. Craig talked about adding emergency relief funding as an item that can be an administrative modification to the Transportation Improvement Program. This is another one that you heard. I gave my legislative update. There was quite a bit of discussion on a couple of those items, and you'll hear about that later in today's agenda. We also talked about strategic planning for PPACG. The organization doesn't currently have a strategic plan, and the board would like to have one. So we're kicking off that process, and it will probably take the next year to do research and gather input from groups like yours on what we should be focusing on and coming up with an implementation plan and so forth. Scott gave an update on TIP project submissions, which you have heard as well. Craig talked about federal planning and programming requirements. And we heard TIP Amendment 14, which you guys had already heard. And that was it.
Great. Any questions, comments? Anything from the audience?
I guess
Yes,
my
sir.
only comment would be, I think it'd be very interesting to this group, or certainly to myself, with regards to the strategic plan for PPACG, just kind of getting periodic updates. I think that'd be
I think you're
great.
going to be more involved than maybe you want to be.
Good, even better.
No, we just want updates. Okay. Item number 5. Oh, I'm sorry, Vince.
I had brought up the topic last meeting about having one of the officers from PPACG come to this meeting and just maybe once every 6 months or so and say, how's it going? And also to let us know what they're looking for us to do, any different than we're doing right now. That's probably part of the strategic plan, but it'd be good to have them come in and just say hello once in a while. We have Rob.
We can certainly pass along that invitation. I believe the consensus of the group was that it would probably be more appropriate for CAC members to go to the board meeting.
I don't know. That's, now we have 20 people going up there versus one person coming here. So anyway, I just offer that out.
Well, and I think you had sent out an invitation for us to start attending some of their kind of workshop things on Friday. So
Yes,
that was
thank
another
you.
Yeah, that's
opportunity
good.
for us to interact with them as
Those-
well.
Those are the Fridays prior to the board meetings, so that is a great opportunity for all of you to hit both the educational component that you asked about and also have a little more face-to-face time with the board members. You know, and that's a less formal setting, so you probably get to have more conversation. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, on to item number 5, joint land use study item. Angela? You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Essing. I was hired to work on the joint land use study through Pikes Peak Area Council of Government, so it's very nice to be before you today. Rachel has asked for us to come and give you an overview of the project, and the timing is perfect in the sense that we have now formed the Policy and Technical Committee, which I will talk a little bit more about. And we are starting basically next week, well, really you're the kickoff, so starting today, to make presentations within the community to start to get community input. So it's exciting to be here today with you as the kickoff to this, and hope that all of you help spread the word for us too. So having said that, I'm not going to be too redundant with what you have in your packet, but I do want to focus on this sheet, which would have been the second attachment after the memo, because it's a little bit different than other PPACG committees that have been informed. We received funding from the Office of Economic Adjustment, which is a division of the Department of Defense. And through that funding, there's particular requirements for how a joint land use study is set up. There have been 120 joint land use studies done across the U.S., and this is the first one ever completed in the state of Colorado, so we feel very fortunate to finally be on their list. In doing so, they asked for a neutral party to be the study sponsor, which ends up being PPACG, and we're very excited to assume that role. Then they asked us to set up a policy committee. And as you can see by the slide, the policy committee sets the direction for the study, and it is comprised of city officials, county officials, installation leadership, and other state and community officials that deal with every installation here in the Colorado Springs region. That policy committee is then supported by a technical committee, and the technical committee is made up of both local and base planners, so we can start to get into the technical aspects of some of the compatibility issues that we'll be studying, and I'll go into that in a little more detail here too soon. That technical committee is then supported by working groups. Now, the working groups are made up to specifically address a task or a compatibility issue within the overall study. Those working groups will be compiled of a representative from the Policy and Technical Committee, other experts in the community, and then citizens as well who have interest in that compatibility issue. So again, this is a little bit different than other PPACG committees, so I did want to go over that with you. From there, I'm going to jump into the PowerPoint. So we've spent 6 months really organizing and getting the grant together. We've spent a considerable amount of time with the community leadership, with the installation leadership, so that we can understand all of the documents that are available to us today. Because one of our goals in doing this study is that we're absolutely not redundant with other things that are happening in the community and on the installations. So we spent a considerable amount of time looking at the documents that are available, things that have been compiled to date. And at the same time, we worked very closely with Rachel and her team to put together a communication plan, a public communication plan, in which we will reach the public. And in doing so, like I had mentioned, we're kicking that off today with all of you. I'll go through this PowerPoint because you're one aspect of that. We're embarking on a speakers bureau in which we're going to go out to the 4-county region, which I'll explain here too in just a second, and really try to touch as many people as we can. We want as much input as we can get. And we're going to do that in various ways, which I'll explain to you in this PowerPoint. So let me start going through that, and I'll be more than happy to take questions and comments that you have. One other thing that I want you to think about as I go through this PowerPoint is that this is what we will be presenting, or what we plan at this point to present to the community. And so I'd also like some feedback on the actual PowerPoint, which Rachel and I had discussed too, and how understandable it is, how well you think, if it makes sense to you, those type of things. So again, you're going to help us kind of build this into the perfect PowerPoint before we go to the rest of the counties and communities. Oops. So what is a joint land use study? A joint land use study is a community-driven process. So this really is a study that's coming from the communities, which is why the public input is so important in this. It can't be a community-driven process without that. It's also a study that looks at the land use when military installations and communities are neighbors. Now, they can be neighbors in multiple ways. They can be neighbors because they share property boundaries. They can be neighbors because they share airspace. They can be neighbors because they share different missions for the installations, require them to be neighbors in different ways to the communities. So we're looking at all of those aspects in which they are neighbors within this study. The ultimate study will produce a list of those issues, which will be derived from both the base leadership, community leadership, and all of the citizens. And then we will look at ways of promoting compatible land use from those issues that are brought up, so that the end result is recommendations for both communities and the installations to take back to their particular organization and implement. It does cover a 4-county region. So we're looking at El Paso, Pueblo, Fremont, and Teller. This is a very large region to look at because we are right now looking at all the installations in that area minus the Pueblo Army Depot. So that is not included in this study. We started with the Air Force Academy and obtaining a lot of data from the Air Force Academy. They also have an auxiliary airfield out here. Sometimes they refer to it as Bullseye, so you may be familiar with that. It's even past Schriever. And we're also, the second installation that we started to work with then was Fort Carson and obtaining data from them. We recently met with Peterson, and Cheyenne Mountain is a subset of Peterson, but still part of it. And so obviously we'll be looking at Cheyenne Mountain and the relationship that they have with the community also. And Schriever is not currently in the study, but we're looking at adding them. So their request right now is in the Pentagon. It's been there for a while. It is a big building. It's taking it some time to work its way around. But we do feel that they will be added pretty shortly and will become an official part of the study here. So what will the study cover? It's actually a detailed land use assessment. The great thing is with PPACG, we have 3 staff members. We have myself, and then we have Brian Potts, who is a planner assigned to the project. And then we have Tom, who you've probably worked with in the past too, who's working on all of our GIS for this project. So right now, the detailed land assessment is obtaining land records around each of the installations and underneath their mission, their airspace, and understanding what kind of land uses are happening in that area. So taking an inventory of that. Once we have that inventory, we're going to look at the compatibility issues that may or may not be present in those areas. And then also an assessment of regional growth trends and how those growth trends can potentially affect some compatibility issues in the future. And then resources that facilitate the community development decision making. This really gets into a lot of the details of the process in which, when something happens, as an example, when something happens in the city of Colorado Springs, and if it's happening around the Air Force Academy, how is the Air Force Academy notified of what's going on? Do they have a chance to comment on that type of work? And the same on the flip side. When something's happening on the Air Force Academy, how are the neighbors around the Air Force Academy notified of those items that are happening, those type of things? So that's what that refers to. And then, of course, it will cover recommendations and strategies in the very end to promote more compatible land use. Oops. The study partners. So this is quite complex. As that slide that I showed you with the policy committee, technical committee, and working groups, all of those groups are being populated with study partners that you see from this slide. And again, kind of an easy way to think about it is, at the policy committee, it's the highest level. So people sitting on the policy committee have some impact to, more than likely, all of the installations. And then as we work our way down to the technical committee, they start to be more specific. So in that sense, we have the Bureau of Land Management who's sitting on the technical committee. They have a lot of relationships with Fort Carson. And then we have the National Forest Service sitting on the policy committee because they have more relationships with the Air Force Academy and Fort Carson and Cheyenne. And so you start to see kind of the complexity of this project, having so many counties and so many installations involved. Issues that will be discussed. And these are very specific issues right now that we are looking at through surveys and community discussion with people like yourself. So we'll be looking at water issues, water and stormwater issues, recreational issues with the installations. We know there have been partnerships in the past that have worked well, and looking at how those can potentially continue, or if they can't, what are alternatives to those. The use of airspace in our community. Transportation as it relates to circulation around those installations, alternative energy development, noise and vibration, and then other challenges, which can be things like air quality, dust, smoke, those type of things. Public input. So this is where Rachel and her staff come into play, and they've provided, in addition to this great PowerPoint, they've provided a lot of input on how we should address the public and how we should go about getting input. And so we are going to be starting with telephone town halls. We're actually going to do a telephone town hall for each county. Those will start in next week. Those will start next week. Time's going by very fast. We'll be doing 2 of those next week, and then the other 2 will come later in April. We really have a hope of reaching a lot of people with these telephone town halls, and it's very random, so we think we'll get good input that way. Web-based comments. Right now, the telephone town hall, and also my presentation to you and other speaker bureau presentations like this, is going to direct people to our website. So we want you to go to our website because we have a survey that will be on that website starting next week. So you can look for that next Monday. We hope to have that up and running by next Monday. And that website will ask you what particular installation you see yourself as a neighbor to, and then populate questions from there as to how you see the relationship with the community and the installations at this point in time. And that will also be driven through the Speakers Bureau. As I mentioned, speaking to groups like yourself, we're going to really get the word out in all 4 counties to do so. From there, when we get the first information gathering from the survey that we have on our website, we're really going to drill down into the issues that the community identifies. If we find that there are particular regions that have a concentration of particular issues, then we're going to go out to those areas and have community meetings. So right now we don't know what those meetings are going to be because they're really driven by the community and the input that we're going to get from the community. So what we really want to stress today is that we would love for you all to go on and take the community survey starting next week. It should be very easy to find it. I don't want to commit, but it might even be on our front page. And so we'll make it very easy to find. And
We'll send a link directly to the CAG.
Oh, perfect. Okay, which would be great, because then what we'd really like to ask too is that you are all influential in your own way, so please send that link out then to additional contacts that you have. Again, just helping us spread the word in any way. So that would be great, Rachel. Thank you for offering to do that. Having said that, I'll give you some next steps, and then I'll open the floor to questions. So we're continuing to compile and analyze, well, I shouldn't say continue, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. We will compile and analyze all the community feedback that we get during the month of April through the telephone town halls and the survey. And then we're continuing to obtain the installation documents and the community documents and really do a nice gap analysis to understand what they currently cover and what's missing, which will help us complement the community input too. And then in fall of 2017, we'll come up with a draft plan. The community and yourself will have a chance to review that. It will be available on our website. We'll probably have a complimentary survey that will go along with that too, so that we get some very direct feedback in regards to that draft plan. And then from there, we will come out with the final implementation plan in early 2018. So having said all that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. Yes.
Any of the three folks been on any of the 120 previous studies? Have you been part of those before, any of the three people?
No, we have not. We are all local representation who are working on the study, so.
Another question, I don't see the word encroachment up here, and I think having done this stuff before, that's really the whole purpose of this, is to prevent the community from encroaching on the military installations so they don't have to close them down like they did at Lowry or Houston or many of the other installations around the nation.
That is one thing that some of the studies have absolutely looked at. One thing that makes Colorado Springs region a little bit different is a lot of land uses are there today. So we need to look at how we can handle the missions of the installations and the current neighborhoods that have, for lack of a better term in that sense, encroached on or become neighbors, become very close neighbors to the installations. And so really with what you have mentioned too is we will look at that type of future development happening once Schriever is added, and on the east side of Peterson also, that type of development can happen out there. So we'll look at that more with a futuristic eye in that essence.
Okay.
Yes.
We've tried to stay away from that term, Vince, because it really sends an interesting message. So we're going out to the community and we're saying, this is a community-driven study. It's your land use and your plan. And then you use the term like encroachment, which implies that the community is doing something wrong. So while we're going to look at land use issues and development adjacent to bases, we do want to stay away from, you mentioned the term specifically. That is something that we're trying to avoid.
I guess the reason
Which
is...
she's just conveniently avoided.
Well, the thing is, I was involved in the Air Force in the predecessor to this, which was called the ACUS program.
Oh, cool.
And it was all about encroachment.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you don't talk about it, especially at Schriever, I mean, that was built so that they didn't have the same thing happen to them that happened to Houston, where the community encroached upon them. So they built this buffer a mile outside of Schriever, and now we have electronic encroachment. It's just new sophistication has come about. They don't have the physical encroachment of communities, but they do have another type of encroachment that they didn't even think about back then.
Well, we're not going to avoid the subject. We're just going to avoid the term.
Well, that's what it's all about. It's encroachment. You're trying to prevent encroachment so the military installations can stay here and can, co-live with the communities. And the result is encroachment and shutting down the base if it does happen. But anyway, that's my feeling. Just put it out on the table.
Al, did you have a question?
I did. I'm also a El Paso County Planning Commissioner. So I'll tell you, the land use manual is big enough for 2 men and a boy to carry. And it's very, very complex. And I don't know how you're going to take this manual that's this big and sort of try to understand, without 2 or 3 other people to read it through, how all that.
That's a great.
And yet at the same time, while this is all going on, we're just making land use decisions about some things that are major builds, including around Schriever and everywhere throughout the county other than. And I want to know what we should do, what I should take back to the Planning Commission to say, well, what do you want us to do at the Planning Commission? So how do I get that so that we're not deciding things that are already encroaching on the things that you haven't put the documentation yet? I'm just confused as to where to go.
Okay. Two great questions, and I can answer both of those. The first, the 300-pound manual, which I completely understand, and we've discussed it quite length, too, because we feel that the study area is so broad that it could absolutely be that. And so we're going to handle this with just technology, basically. We're very excited right now, the plan for this final document would be to be very web-based. And so the great thing that you're saying is, too, is when you sit down, El Paso County, and you think, gosh, there's going to be something happening close to Fort Carson, where would I look in this 300-page manual to figure this out? What we hope to do is set it up so that it's interactive. You can type in either Fort Carson or you can type in El Paso County, and then a special document will be populated just for you that has all the recommendations that are tied to Fort Carson and El Paso County. And so you're only looking at a document on your screen that applies to you. Same thing, if you're at Schriever, you type in Schriever, they're going to have a document that populates for them. Fremont County, if they have something happening in Fremont County, they're able to type that in, and a separate document will populate for that. I'm not the technical person to help with that, but Tom in our office is going to help us do that in the end with the document, because we absolutely want it to be user-friendly. There's nothing worse than a huge document that nobody wants to read or look through. And so we think, and one of our goals in the very beginning was, obviously this implementation plan has to be implementable, and to do so, we want to make it interactive in that way.
Can I raise an issue at your report about on the Planning Commission at El Paso County? As soon as we learn about that an item is to be brought up on the agenda, we are forbidden to get any information other than what's testimony. We can't visit, we can't do anything.
Right.
So there I see this big, huge development going into near Schriever, right?
Right.
That
But that's where you will rely on your staff, and if we have a document that's available to your staff to utilize in that sense, then they should be providing you with information that this is covered in the comprehensive plan, this is covered in the zoning code, and this is covered in the joint land use study document. You would hope.
Thank you.
You would hope for your direction, of course.
I want to go to jail for
Yeah, okay, right. And then your second question is, what do you do right now? Obviously, there's a 2-year study, and there's a lot of things that can be done in the next 2 years. And I would say you just really, really encourage your staff to, when there are applications in the areas of the installations, that you really encourage them to work with the installations. One of the things we're really finding by having worked so far with Air Force Academy and Fort Carson and Peterson is that a lot of time that communication is very hard. The installations are quite complex in themselves, and getting to the right person, if you're trying to contact them from El Paso County, can be quite hard. So we need to look at this in both aspects, both city-county side of communicating with the installations, and then the installations communicating back to the municipalities and the counties. And so we're really looking at that aspect as a result, as a component of this study also.
Mr. Baker.
I understand that there are 4 counties involved, but we've referenced kind of adjunct facilities at the Air Force Academy and of Peterson Field, and Fort Carson has an adjunct facility that is a training site in Pinyon Canyon, which would have all of the same issues that this study might have. And I just wonder, why is it not under consideration in this study also?
I may not be the best person to answer that, but I can tell you that it was excluded from the study because of the complexity of it and the scale of it at this point in time. Whether it would be a second phase to the study, I am unsure of that. But at this point, it was not included in the study. That's probably the best answer I can give you at this time.
Vince?
The precursor of this, the ACOS program, it was, when that document was put together, it wasn't mandatory for any of the municipalities. It was more mandatory on the military than the municipalities. How will this be treated? Is it, are people buying into it and it becomes the Bible, or is it just kind of suggestive that you implement these guidelines?
So that's a very good question. And the ACOS is still alive and well because we're reviewing a lot of those with the installation documents that we're reviewing. And they have even some new supporting documents for that too. IEMT is one of the encroachment management plans, something like that. So they have quite a few plans that they use on the installations. And those haven't been made public record by the installations with the communities in the past. So one piece of the study is to look at those studies and to figure out through this study what pieces of that can be made public with the communities to help work with them. So that's one aspect of it.
Public or mandatory? That's what I'm talking about. One is
Well, and let me get to the second part, which I feel is a two-part question. So the second part of your question is technically, and the joint land use study is set up as a non-binding document. So it is a non-binding document. So if we say we recommend that Monument changes their zoning code to do ABC, that is up to, in the end, that is up to the town of Monument to take that recommendation and determine if they want to implement that change in A, B, and C in their zoning code. And this happens in a couple different ways. What we've seen with the other 120 studies that have been implemented is, I would say, a little over half of those, the community has embraced the study so much that each community, in a lot of cases too, it's only one community with these studies, the community has embraced the study so much that those recommendations easily get implemented by the leadership from the policy committee, still being elected officials and leaders in those communities. It gets implemented that way. There's another maybe half of the studies that actually receive some additional funding because they seem to be more fragmented. They maybe don't have the political support that the other studies had. And so they at times get additional funding to kind of work as a third party like PPACG to then try to implement those recommendations into the community as needed by needing more leadership from more of a neutral party like us. So it happens both ways, and I think for us, we'll determine that as we go through this study. I can tell you right now it has incredible community support and involvement, which has made my job easy and quite fun, so that's great at this point. We'll see how that evolves through the project.
And I guess one thing is that this is one of the more complex, if not the most complex, because of the number of installations and the diversity of the installations that we have in this area here. Usually you have one that you're dealing with. Here, 5.
Exactly.
Plus little other pieces.
Exactly. Yes, we aren't we are very close to largest. We may not be the largest from a landmass area, because I wanted to say all those things too. We're the biggest and the largest, and but they couldn't exactly say that. But we are in the running probably for the top 3 to top 5 studies that are the biggest. So yes, that's correct.
At least there's no naval base. Mr. Moffett.
Angela, could you describe a little bit more a working group? What is that going to be?
Yep, perfect. Let me give you an example. So we are talking about those very specifically this next Thursday. We will have our second technical committee meeting, and on their agenda is to start to discuss and populate who would be on that working group. And let me give you an example. One example is we know there are a lot of flights that leave Fort Carson. They head into both Teller and Fremont County to do their high altitude mountain training, and that training has really ramped up in the last few years because I've been told that the mountains in Teller and Fremont County really resemble Afghanistan, and the training is perfect training to train the soldiers from Fort Carson for such. And in doing so, we probably need to put together there's been a lot done, so again, this will be based on community input, but let's say we do get community input that they have concerns about those helicopters, and we've also heard concerns both from the National Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management too. So that working group right now could potentially look like something having several members from Fort Carson, having a member from Teller County, Fremont County, having a member from the Bureau of Land Management, having a member of the National Forest Service, other such entities like that, having probably a state representative on the committee, and then based on the community input that we get, let's say there's 2 or 3 neighborhoods that seem to be more impacted than others, we would also have then a representative from those community or neighborhood organizations on that working group.
Okay.
And some working groups will have more technical people on them too. You mentioned the electromagnetic spectrum around Schriever and Peterson, those type of things. You would have a similar group like that, but with experts also in the field of electromagnetic spectrum.
Is there a specific role, or can you define what discussions are going on about the CAC role in this? Is there any specific assigned or expected role for the CAC?
Your role is to help us get the information out. So just like today, going back and trying to help us make sure we get the community input that we need by helping us with the communication aspects of the study.
Because I'm probably not going to say this properly, but we've held discussions in our committee before about what our role is. Are we transportation, and people come to us with changes for plans and things, and we ask our 15 questions, and then it moves on? Is there anything more we're supposed to be doing? That's a constant question for us. And when you read our charter, it very specifically says economic development and military impact planning. At the same time, this is a huge study. It's multifunctional, as you said, lots of moving parts, lots of people, lots of resources. But I also question, is there something that we at the CAC level should be doing specifically, since we were selected by member governments, member entities, to kind of represent at some level the community? Did I say that poorly, or?
No.
Okay.
Excellent.
It's just, I see all this stuff going on, and it's kind of inside our wheelhouse, if I can use that typical term, and yet we're just a piece. I'm not saying we should be more than that, but help us bring value to ourselves and to the process of CAC. I ask that question, or give that opinion. I'm not sure which it was.
And I think we've definitely discussed that, Rachel, Rob, and myself, and how that would work. And I think it will evolve as the plan evolves. And so obviously coming to you with the very beginning parts of this. The other thing I would ask you to do at this point in time, too, is currently on our website, you can sign up to be notified of all the items that we will continually notify people of throughout the study. And so that's a great way, too. Rachel will probably do some of that herself also, but another great way for you to do that is go on and populate those fields. Just ask for your name and your email address.
I live 300 feet from the edge of the Air Force Academy, and I love it when the planes pulling the gliders go overhead, but a lot of people do not, because they're very noisy.
Right.
I'm sure they can put mufflers on the planes, blah, blah, blah. But when I read this, it was very interesting. I strongly support the continued military presence. It's great for our community. But my first notes were CAC members to join working groups that are other question mark. Just kind of, what's our role in this? Or is it just to get periodic updates, hold a discussion, and I guess we vote or we absorb? I don't know which. Anyway, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I've taken so much
No,
time.
what I would say, too, is being a CAC does not limit your involvement by any means. So being involved because you have the information before you today is going to be quite easy for you. So if you populate the items that are available right now on the website. If you fill out the survey, Rachel's done a great job kind of giving some open-ended comments, those type of things. I have a list on my desk of people who would like to be involved in the working groups, those type of things. So you can make those comments through all of those forums on our website, and you can make them directly to myself or Rachel, too, that you would like to be involved in. Here's your capacity of you're a neighbor at this and those type of things. So please bring those to us. Being a member of this group does not limit your involvement in any means.
I'd kind of hope to flip that. I'd hope that the question would be, what can the CAC do?
Yeah, what can we do more?
What value can we bring to this process, not just be another piece of the process? I don't know. I'm struggling with trying to define that, but I don't want us to just meet in this room and periodically get updates. I don't think that's not our scope. Help me, Vince.
Okay.
Cut me off.
I'm not cutting you off. I think this committee could be just as important to the transportation group as it is to your group. And we spend a lot of time on transportation. We should be spending a lot of time on what you're talking about, because we're talking about the community.
That's correct.
And there's a lot of knowledge and potential in this room here to help you out.
Right. Rachel?
So one specific thing that we wanted to ask you to do right now, Angela mentioned it before, but I want to bring us back to it, is you just saw the PowerPoint presentation that we plan to give in our Speakers Bureau. So we specifically want your feedback on that. Did we cover all the pertinent points? Did we cover points that are not pertinent that we should take out?
Funny you should mention that. I have a couple of comments.
Perfect.
First, I wonder if this is really the Colorado Springs Regional Joint Land Use Study, and whether or not you're going to be willing to take the slings and arrows from Pueblo West when you go down there and tell them that. So that might be one comment, is it really Colorado Springs, or is it the Pikes Peak region? So that's one thing that everybody argues about all the time. Second, I would add a couple of things. If you've already identified the policy committee, you could probably add that slide so that people get a flavor for what names and what types of people and who it is that's kind of, what level of person is on there. Maybe they know somebody, maybe they could make some comment, maybe that would help us understand sort of who they are. And the same on the technical committee if you know who they are. And I think the Hal's comment or question about what is a working group, you might want to provide some examples of that on the slideshow so that people can get a flavor for how many of those there might be, and you know what level of detail they might get into. So those are a couple of things. On the public input piece, I'm glad to see that it was, I think that was pretty extensive. I've had some experience with these telephone town halls, and they can really work well at various points in the process, especially when you get a little bit of press or some knowledge out there in the community. People can take that opportunity, but try to avoid times when there are actual elections, because the phone rings off the dang hook. So next week might be a good time. So those are a couple comments I had about what might improve this slideshow.
Thank you.
You also had this community input thing on our process. That I think in color might be kind of an interesting slide for people to get an understanding of what you're going to be doing, because when you put up something that says we'll come back and talk to you in 2017 and let you know what we did, it's kind of a head scratcher for people, is what are you doing in between. Mr. Baker.
Kevin, I think your point is really good about Pueblo, because look at the issues we have. Stormwater, wastewater. Even though the piece of Fort Carson that goes down into Pueblo County is pretty good size, it's the relationship that our area has with Pueblo that has been problematic in the past. And if they see that Colorado Springs region, as an organization before I retired, that went into Pueblo to do business. We were very careful about couching ourselves as part of southern Colorado in it, rather than Colorado Springs. It didn't, and we were told that by some people down in Pueblo. So I think that's really good counsel that Kevin.
Ellen?
Courtney. Oh, you're
Oh,
good.
sorry. I didn't see her first.
I picked the sneaky spot on purpose. Excuse me while I get on my bus soapbox really quick, but I was just curious if public transportation is going to be within the scope of this, acknowledging that the LRTP has, I think, 3 out of 5 of the new service areas were military installations.
Yep, it is, and both Peterson and Schriever have noted that it is an issue for them, so it is on.
I don't know if
study.
your flyers for that, but within the multimodal transportation aspect, public transportation isn't listed. So if it's possible to add that in just for people to be able to have that scope coming in mind, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, now you're up.
Thank you. And I would just go a step further than you, Kevin, and you, Bob, and say that it would be probably beneficial for everyone working on this project to take a look at the what's being proposed from the perspective of that portion of the region that you're going to before you arrive, so you're prepared to deal with the questions from their point of view. The view of the project from Pueblo and from Fremont County and even from Teller is very different from your view standing at Fort Carson or the Air Academy, et cetera, looking in those directions. And if you've taken a look at that and considered the questions, the type of questions that could come, you'll be better prepared, and therefore the conversation, the exchange of information will be ever so much more useful and informative for everyone. That being said, I can tell you that as someone who has those helicopters going over her house in Teller County, I'm part of a community that's very excited to be supportive of the training. And we're looking for ways to be more supportive without, shall we say, getting too much information. We want to support, but we don't want to intrude on the process. We understand that a certain part of the training has to be discreet, shall we say. So, but we're eager to help where we can. So I perceive that you're going to get a lot of positive feedback, but I just want you to be prepared by going in with some understanding of the community perspective from their point of view before you arrive. That's all. Thanks.
Fran?
Yeah, just one thought, as you were talking about the working groups and all the different committees, from a process standpoint, people that are process kind of, that's what they think about. The working group may be made up of elements of the technical committee and some others, but what's the process when the working group says, Eureka, we've come up with a solution, we think? Does that go to the technical committee, then to the policy committee? Who do you pin the rose on? Who's making the decisions in all of this thing at the end of it?
Great question, and it happens exactly as you said. So the working groups will make recommendations to the technical committee. The technical committee, as, again, being kind of the technical experts in those communities, will work through them to make sure they are implementable within their communities. And then from there, they will recommend to the policy committee, which does have the final say, A or nay, to put it into the study. Yes.
Al?
I can only suggest that, with the exception of everybody else on this committee who understands the workings of process and all those technical things with the lists of people and objectives, part of this is a sales effort that I would like to maybe take to some people who don't understand process. And you need a really simple version of this without a lot of lists of names of people and say, listen, people, this is going to impact this. You know what I'm saying? A really basic level thing that you can sell, and then to the next phase of it, to the people who are interested in process, you get who's on the technical committees and how they report to people. You know what I mean? I think it's sometimes we can understand this, but they're trying to take it to the Sisters of the Poor or the Mothers of Boy Scouts. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's much harder to sell.
I do like your flyer, though, that lists the compatibility challenges, because looking at that, there's really nobody that couldn't find something within that list that relates to them, so I don't know if that's something that you want to include in the slideshow in some way or another, but I think just knowing exactly how it relates to people's day-to-day lives is important for that introductory piece.
Okay, I'm going to try to cut this off,
No, you can't cut me off.
but so Rachel will be the last person, because I don't want to have my first meeting that I chair go past 5 or 5:30 or 6.
You'll know.
Okay, Rachel.
It's a quick one. Kind of tapping onto what Ellen and Al are saying, another request that we have for you is we could really use your help with suggestions on who we should visit in our Speakers Bureau. Now, we don't have the resources to hit every Rotary Club in the four-county area. So if you can think a little higher level, what are those groups, and particularly outside of El Paso County, where we should go and present this information and make sure that people are involved. If you would just send me emails with your suggestions, that would be tremendously helpful.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Angela. Okay, number 6. Recommend tip for release for public comment. Mr. Casper.
Good afternoon. I have some additional handouts to supplement the volume. Really?
Thank you. Needed more paper.
Are these passing both directions?
Yep.
Okay.
No, I have a set for this side and a set for this side. So
So we're
that way
talking
you don't
from
have to
different
walk back
stuff,
and
right?
forth. Since you last met, the TAC has had a workshop, their regular meeting, and a special meeting to go over the 2 items that are related that follow.
Apparently they're different.
At the workshop, it was a workshop to go over the scores that the projects had received for applying for our money in 2020 to 2022. What happened was a negotiated removal of projects and rescoping of projects to get down to a list of projects that matched the funding that was available, that everybody except I think one group was happy with. At the regular TAC meeting, we refined some of those numbers of the funding levels. There was different match rates between the Metro category and the TAP category, and when we initially handed the money out, we kept the project cost the same, and so some of the federal money changed, and we had to adjust that. And then at the special TAC meeting, which was actually yesterday, we got the list of projects that have to take out of the long-range plan to put these other projects that got recommended into the plan so they could be funded in the TIP. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, you have a larger version of this?
Or my,
Actually, I do, but it's for me.
On 14A, we know the horse plank. That's what we need.
Is there a simple slide of what got cut?
Of what got cut? It was, yes, it was in one of the handouts. Let me see which.
well, that,
It was in what went out in the handouts that you got. Yeah, it was the attachment 1, actually. And it's the items that were highlighted in sort of a rose, or if you print it out in gray, those.
so now you're not talking about item 7?
No, it's still item 6. It's the ones that were withdrawn from the TIP
Okay,
analysis.
all right, I see. Okay.
And, yeah, on the right side, I can go through them.
And that has not changed given the last meeting?
No, that has not changed.
Okay.
So the handouts that I just passed around are just the 2 categories of funding that we talked about, STP Metro, which is not called that anymore, and the TAP category, which is also not called that anymore. And so the projects that were selected for funding are listed on the first 2 pages of the Metro, or recommended by funding by the TAC, are on the first 2 pages of the Metro and the first page of the TAP. And it shows the total funding, Metro funding, and the local match for those projects. And then it goes on to show the other projects that are in the TIP from 2017 to 2019 also, so you can see a complete list of those two categories of funds as recommended by the TAC.
So this that you just passed out,
Yes.
we have the first 2 pages.
Of the Metro are the projects that are recommended by the TAC.
Okay, so 13-10, which is advanced traffic detection, everything below that was not recommended?
Let's see. On mine, it's from 10-46, the Printers Parkway Roundabout. Those projects from there down are already in the TIP. They're in the 2016 to 2019 TIP, and so they're carried
1046
forward.
Included.
Say again?
1046 included in that statement?
It is included in that statement. So the transit planning studies, the Ute Pass Trail, statewide household travel survey, the Charter Oak Ranch Road, Creek Walk Trail, Jackson Creek Parkway, Ruxton Avenue, 30th Street, South Academy Boulevard, and Hancock, those are the projects that are recommended by the TAC for inclusion in the TIP for funding.
I have a question, Craig. The TAC, how many hours the TAC, these people, they understand these projects. I mean, they understand the intricacies of these projects. How long did they spend beating these up in committee meetings that you talked about? How many hours?
The workshop was, what did you say, 2 hours? The TAC meeting was a solid 2 hours, and the workshop was an hour.
Okay. And I guess we're going to
I
look
mean,
at this
or the
in
special TAC meeting was an hour.
20 minutes, and we're going to go yay, nay.
This is information only, this one.
No, it's recommendation
is-
for
Oh, I'm
public.
sorry,
Review
it's
and
for
recommend.
Public,
Yes.
public comment.
So, if you'd like more information, we can provide.
And then what is the other spreadsheet?
That is Transportation Alternatives Program. It's called something different now, but for now, we're going to keep calling it TAP.
So
And it's
this
the
was
same thing.
old
It's
TAP.
got 3 projects recommended for funding: the Route 9, Phase 4, Creek Walk Trail, and El Paso County Wetland Bank. And those are the 3 projects that the TAC recommended for TAP funding.
But not downtown monument sidewalks, is that in?
Those were already, that was already in the TIP. It's actually funded in 2016, 2017, so.
Now I understand.
So another question to build on that, items 6 and 7 are related,
Yes.
and just from a procedural standpoint, it seems difficult to me for us to recommend what we ought to add before we actually discuss what we're going to take out. And so I think that both of those need to kind of go together. Does that make sense to you?
It does, because you can't recommend,
Everyone?
you don't know how much you have to take out until you know what you're going to add.
Well, sort of. I was
Because-
going to say exactly, but I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, so we need to, what further presentation did you have
That
relative
it
to
is.
this?
We have the list of the projects, and so are there questions about the projects, process?
Yes, ma'am.
This is a minor comment, but on page 9 of your financial plan, you have a spreadsheet for the CAP and CP. I just would recommend that your local and federal match some equal the total value. I know it's probably rounding on the Excel.
Is this the one that was in the packet?
Yeah.
Yeah, then we had some errors in there, and that's what, it's another reason we corrected it with the handout, is getting rid of some of the errors in the Metro and TAP. Yep. Yeah, nope, it's just those 2, and this is the 2 categories that PPACG's board selects projects for. The other projects are selected by CDOT, so that they are what they are, sort of.
So that'll be updated.
Yes.
Hal?
What is the precise definition of public comment? What is it that you're trying to communicate outwards and
Are
what do you
these-
expect back?
We're saying these are the projects that we think meet our regional goals to implement the long-range plan, and would like feedback if the public agrees.
One of the things that we've run into a couple of times, 6 months, a year ago, we had really complex information, and for somebody to understand this was extremely difficult because it is very detailed. Is there any way to put a 1 or 2 page executive summary in front of this that a layman like myself might be able to at least see what the key issues are? In other
Yes,
words,
definitely.
you know, just like you've said, the TAC is recommending these projects be added, is recommending these projects be deleted so that the funding fits. And please find attached everything you ever wanted to know about the details.
Okay.
Possible?
It is. Most of the details of why the projects were removed is that the applicants said that they'll seek other funding sources.
Which is fine.
So-
I mean, that's it. Just
It's not.
it's kind of putting this out for public comment. Are you going to get any?
In the past, we've gotten as many as 11 comments.
This just seems it's big. Yes, it's big.
We have a member of the TAC here too, don't we?
Couple.
Does anybody want to support this, or?
Thanks, Chris.
Good afternoon, Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit, and the first vice chair of the TAC. As Craig mentioned, to answer your question, we've met 3 times in just a few short weeks. And besides the time spent on the meetings, local staff time, myself, Victoria from the county, many of us have been spending a lot of additional time looking at all of this. And we feel really comfortable with what we recommended yesterday. And to answer your question, Mr. Walker, both of these do have to go at the same time. So in order to put the projects that we want into the new TIP, we have to amend the plan, take projects out, and include new ones in. So we can't do one without the other. And, beyond all the time that we spent, PPACG staff has been very, very patient, very helpful. They worked with us, and local government staff has spent an awful lot of time on this. So we're very confident with the way the project's fleshed out, that they're meeting the goals of the Regional Transportation Plan, and we recommend approval of both items.
Okay. Mr. Baker?
Under circumstances, Brian, like we have right here, almost all of those, the applicant withdrew the projects for various reasons, or because some of those projects scored pretty well.
Right, yeah, and what we need to remember is, even though this is a 6-year TIP, 17 through 2022, we only have 3 years of funding for 20 through 2022. So we're working with a lot of needs, a lot of projects, and even a smaller
The
pot of money.
applicants saw that theirs
Yes.
didn't stack up well against what you really needed to push through.
Right, yeah, there's never enough money for anything that we want to do, and this has been brought to the forefront even more so this time. And it's a matter when we submit projects to include in the plan, this was many months ago, opportunities come up, and sometimes priorities change. And by the time we get to this TIP process, that's been the case for some of us. For one of my projects, I submitted 3 projects, 2 bus stop improvement projects and 1 transit planning studies project. One of the bus stop improvement projects was $1.6 million. That, along with another project or 2, can pretty much wipe out all 3 years of TAP funding. So I withdrew the more expensive one in order to get a less expensive one funded. And that is actually a Phase 4 project, so we can actually complete all of the pieces of that rather than scattering around some improvement. So it was strategic, opportunistic changes that we made to what we all submitted.
Courtney? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Victoria Chavez, El Paso County. Let me just support everything Brian has said. We worked really hard on this list of projects. We have had circumstances that have changed. For example, one of our projects has now been funded with FEMA money because of the emergencies that we had, so there's no point in getting money through the TIP program when we can get it from FEMA. So we've had some issues like that happen. We've also done just a huge amount of collaboration between PPACG staff and all the jurisdictions. And some of us gave and some of us took, and we figured out a balanced approach to figure out how to get some really important projects through. So I want to thank everybody in their help with doing that. But I think we came up with a good list of projects.
Courtney.
Well, I think you kind of answered my question, but I'm fairly certain last month, it's not in our electronic packet, but we had that scoring list of all the different categories. And it sounds like you used that and just kind of via discussion reprioritize things. Was there anything more to that process outside of just kind of internal talking? It's nice to see the objective numbers, honestly, for me, just how they score up.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yes, that was a starting point, is to try to fund the better scoring projects. But with knowing what we know, that there's not enough money for everything, it was just a shuffling of what could actually be funded, yeah. And keeping in mind to still fund those better scoring projects.
Vince.
When you voted on this, was this like a 51-49 vote, or was this unanimous at the end? Did you just say?
Release for public comment of the new tip was unanimous, yes.
Nothing was thrown?
No.
Camera.
I actually did read this whole packet for once, and I did appreciate, I did appreciate those entities that we withdrew these requests, that they gave a little explanation of why, and I think that's very helpful, and I think it's good rationale that they showed. I also thought in general the body of this document is very understandable, just kind of giving a background history of PPACG, just our function and what our goal is. What I did struggle was the table of all the funding. It's a lot of numbers, but, and, it's not really clear. Are we looking at millions, dollars, like maybe dollar signs, or the, saying millions would help. Just if we're sending this out to the public, I think that might be helpful. Otherwise, overall, I was really impressed with the document, with just some of these minor clarifications that I think would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, everything's in thousands, so if you see a 1, it means it's 1,000.
Okay. Where is that?
It's not. I don't think it's listed. That's something we definitely should put in the header.
Yeah.
Is in thousands of dollars.
Can you put that up on screen, Craig?
I can.
Thanks.
And zoom in, too.
Of course.
As small as possible.
No, that's the wrong one. No, that's the right one. Okay, zoom in. Let me split this so you can see the project name. And so this is the sheet you're talking about, and I'll go to the top. Wow, I'm way at the bottom. So
This
yeah,
was on the original handout, or the original?
the original packet, correct.
Right.
So this is the bridges on state highways category. So when you see 252, that's $252,000.
Okay, can we just clarify that somewhere?
Yeah, and it should definitely be up here in the header, so it's easy to understand. Or easier, less difficult.
Hannah?
Yeah, thank
Sorry,
you.
Camera, were you finished?
Yep.
Okay.
Great. I'm new to this process and understanding how this works, but representing the Regional Business Alliance, is there an opportunity to request more time to review this information? I just know that transportation is one of our number one economic development issues, and it would be helpful to me, and I don't know if it's just me or if anybody else feels this way, to have more time to review these so that I can explain this to when I'm asked to our delegate, my constituents of sorts, on why the priorities are what they are, or how the process works.
Can you just give us understanding of the deadlines?
Well, we have to adopt our new tip in June, which means we have to release it, and we also have to have a 30-day comment period. It's possible if we released it in May and the board agreed to move the board meeting to the 15th, move it back a week to meet that. However, what would not happen is you and the TAC would not have a chance to review the comments before you recommended the full comment period. We have a 30-day public comment period, and the meeting, the CAC and TAC meetings would have to occur after that 30-day public comment period, which would be, I think, May or June 11th is when it would close. The board meeting's on June 15th, so you'd have to meet on the 12th, 13th, 14th of June to see the comments and make a recommendation at that point, or make a recommendation without the benefit of seeing the comments.
Right, so I think that what we're doing today is recommending this to be opened up to the public for comment.
Right.
That doesn't preclude any of your organizations or anyone from making a comment and saying that they disagree, and then bringing that back to the committee when we vote to recommend the final list. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I will say that we have in the past, admittedly it was a decade ago at this point, received substantive enough comments that we did change. We withdrew a project that had been recommended and put something else in its place due to public comment.
Okay.
So that has happened.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
You know, Hannah, you have not been through the total process of the scoring.
Right.
And that would be helpful. But the other thing you could do is go to one of the TAC meetings where they are discussing this stuff, because they're open, and you get a better understanding of what we're talking about today by going to that meeting.
And I'm also available anytime for any of you who'd like to meet and chat about anything. So, as everybody has heard, I can talk about transportation planning till people's eyes bleed, so. Courtney suffered from it. She's like, yeah, you can, really.
I have one specific question. The Charter Oak Ranch Road
Yes.
item is recommended for construction, but the Charter Oak Ranch Bridge is not. And so I don't know how we're going to build a road.
The bridge is
Without
on a
bridge.
different section. I'll bring it up while
okay.
Victoria answers.
The part that we're looking to funding is the part that goes from Santa Fe, Highway 8587, up to Gate 19. Very high priority for the military. Fort Carson's very anxious to have that part of the project. The bridge is actually on the north side, so that the project that I'm talking about goes south. The bridge is on the north side, and it goes to a gate that is only used for maintenance. And so that project is not nearly as high a priority for Fort Carson as the piece that we are recommending.
Okay.
So, this is.
And now you'll actually be able to understand with this picture.
So, here's the South Fountain interchange to Gate 19. The part we're talking about is this stretch of road right here over to the gate, and you can see the new gate here. So it's this road here is what would be upgraded with the road. The bridge we're talking about is the bridge over this creek right here.
Okay.
And
that is north.
And it only goes to a couple properties up there and to Fort Carson Gate 19A, which, as I said, they use for maintenance.
Okay.
So it was just a lower priority. We also have our Tiger Planning Grant. We got a $1.5 million grant from Federal Highways. Very competitive process, national process up against over 800 different organizations. We received $1.5 million to design the southern part of the project. So we will have a design in the next 2 years, which will line us up and get us ready to actually construct this.
Okay. Courtney?
When this is released for comment, are you listing the things that are being taken out from the tip as well as added?
Well, we'll list what's taken out of the plan. There'll be 2 public comments going forward. So we'll be here's the recommended projects to put into the tip, and then here's the recommended projects to take out of the plan, so that those that are not the ones we're putting in the tip that are not on the plan, bit balances. Yes.
Okay. But
So there will be 2 lists. Yes, it'll list both, and hopefully Rachel will help me figure out how to do it so that's easily understood. So.
Do you need a motion on this?
I will, as soon as I'm done asking questions. Can you explain on the list, the list that is supposed to come out, that did not change, based from what you distributed?
The list of projects?
Projects on item 7 that are supposed to come out of the plan.
That did, actually, it changed. One item was supposed, was in what we sent out, was totally removed. It should have been reduced in funding by a third. It was a $9 million project that should have been reduced to a $6 million project, but what we sent out to you had it reduced to 0. And I'll see, I can find that quickly. Where's the document? I can't read.
Well, I get to go further. What I'm confused about is that there's $23 million worth of ads, and I don't know where the $23 million worth of subtracts.
Well, there's $23 million worth of projects selected for funding in the TIP, but about $7 million of that was already in the plan. So there's $16 million that needed to come out.
Okay.
And there's also $2 million that needed to move from TAP to Metro, just to really complicate it. We had it funded in the plan in the TAP category. We're funding it in the TIP with Metro. So we had to switch the category funding and balance it that way.
Okay, well, that still leaves me with, I could not understand this particular chart to tell me which, because if I add up these numbers, there's $100 million or $200 million. I just don't know which ones are really coming out and which ones are not, so.
That's not it. So coming out of the plan, okay, so let's zoom in here. Is this the right one? TAC plan, yes. So on the far right, this is the change from the old 2040 plan to the recommended plan change by the TAC. And I scroll one more, by the way. So this project, Briargate, Stapleton Parkway, is moving from a $34.9 million project to a $30.6 million. The Academy Boulevard widening is moving from 35. So what we did in counting over here, whoops, wrong way again, is the change is $4 million being taken out, $3 million being taken out, $3 million taken out. So these are the takes, and the puts are down here listed as negative number because there was no project before. Now there's a $2 million project. Now there's a $7 million project. So the total of that change is, I can't really, let's just do an auto sum. Here are the, so there's $18.5 million is what it shows here. $2 million of that is the change from the TAP category to the Metro category. Like I said, just to confuse everything. And I go to the TAP category, you can see.
Before you go, this is what I have. I don't.
We don't have that.
I don't have anything at the end there that sort of added these up. Did somebody else, was that online or was that, because I got mine in the mail.
So, yeah, so the farthest right column wasn't in there. Right, you didn't have the takes and puts. You just had the, we let you guess the,
Yeah.
where, go through individually.
That would be a dangerous thing. Okay, so then, could you then give us, I think we've got the takes, or no, the putting in.
Yeah.
Could you then, just item by item, run through, we don't have to go through detail, but can you tell us what was taken out to
Sure.
add up to that number?
So Briargate Stapleton Parkway road connection was reduced from $34 million to $30.6 million.
Okay.
The Academy Boulevard widening was reduced from $35 million to $32 million. The Academy over Sand Creek Bridge rehabilitation was reduced from $9 million to $6 million. The Fountain Creek Bridge rehab was removed. The Garden of the Gods South Douglas Creek Bridge rehab was removed. The Hancock Phase westbound Spring Creek Bridge was removed. Fillmore Street over the UPPRR Bridge was removed. The Astrodome Boulevard over Peterson Bridge was removed. And the Fountain over Spring Creek Bridge was removed. So these were the removals. Oh, and there's the airport over Sand Creek Bridge was removed.
So a lot of bridges.
Yeah.
Would it be possible that those might be funded by PPRTA too?
That they were withdrawn to pursue other funding opportunities. So we included, because the PPRTA 2 and PPRTA 3 are actually within the confines of this long-range plan, we actually have projects against those funds. So it'd be something, some new funding source for those.
There was a bridge on Fillmore.
Yeah, the Fillmore over the UP.
Terrible rating.
Yeah, it's the one over the railroad.
UPRR.
Yeah, it's this one.
That's my bridge. That's how I get home.
I'm sorry.
Help me, help me.
No, seriously. You have no idea. I'm kidding.
I run underneath it.
So that's that one.
And so was it, keep going over, it got taken out?
Yes. And Victoria just wanted me to mention, there is CDOT has a pool of money that is for off-system bridges that they give to the Colorado Counties Incorporated, and they do the selection for bridges, and that's one possible source of funding these bridges.
Okay. Any other comments or questions or clarifications? Mr. Moffett.
I'd like to go back to my original statement or question. Part of my issue is we didn't have this complete sheet. All we have is a list, and when I compare item 6 with item 7, I couldn't bring them together. That's where I really got confused. Okay. I believe we're at the point, this is my opinion, where we're just going to have to trust kind of our transportation planners of having made all this work. But when I ask for an executive summary, it's not an executive summary of the process. It's kind of this. We put these in. We had to take these out so that things are, financially acceptable. And we've had a couple of examples where we've just got a lot of information, and we find out in a meeting how it all comes together. And then I go back, Hannah's comment, this is a lot to pull together because there's a lot of changes that we've just heard about in this meeting that now make these things, okay, now I see how they fit together. But until today, until you spoke, until we saw the spreadsheet, I couldn't put these two documents together. That's what caused me to kind of be irritable. Sorry about that.
Well, I understand irritable.
Okay, what's the committee's thoughts as to how to move forward? We do need a motion to recommend to the board.
Together?
I think we ought to do them together, frankly. I don't know how we make one and then take the risk of losing the other, sort of like approving the funding but not the issuance of the bonds kind of thing. No, I don't
I
think so.
move that we.
Okay, Mr. Resenek.
Recommend approval to the board, both 6 and 7, or 6 and 7.
As presented and amended?
Yeah.
Okay.
Second.
Second by Fran. Any discussion?
I just want to ask one question. On 30th Street from Fontenot Mesa, the improvements, first of all, that's a terrible stretch of road. I think both the men and women that are cycling there have balls. Okay? It's craziness. And is that going to be wide enough when it's done that there will be bike paths on that stretch of road?
I believe what they're looking at doing is putting a shoulder, paved shoulder along there that would provide some space, better spacing for cyclists.
Well, that's craziness through there.
So they just need a smaller set.
Okay, any other questions, comments on the motion? Okay, the motion is to approve items 6 and 7 as presented and modified. Recommend. Okay. That's right, I'm sorry. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Item number 8, citizen at-large member renewal. My understanding is that Michelle is up for reappointment as a citizen at-large. The tradition has been that we appoint a committee, that we open it for advertisement, and that we interview folks to the extent that people make an application. And then a recommendation from the committee will come back to this board. And is possible, since she's on her second, she's been here before, and she's not here today, otherwise we would have asked her to excuse herself, to avoid the subcommittee process and just simply recommend approval of reappointment of Michelle.
I so move. She's been a valuable member of this committee.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Ellen.
Can you clarify what you are so moving? He mentioned a couple of
That
options.
we re-up Michelle for her second term.
Without opening the process
Without
to new
opening the
applicants.
process.
I second.
And I have a
Okay,
question on that.
any-
I'm in favor of that, but we also have Al that we need to replace. Evidently his term, I'm sorry, it's in November, isn't it?
He's in November.
Yeah, so that's.
Paul is up at the same time, but he's term limited, luckily for Paul. Maybe. I'm not speaking for Paul.
Okay.
Also, though, he isn't a member at large, so he would be appointed by one of our member organizations, and we wouldn't have. We just had to be stuck with him if he got reappointed.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
My term is also up May 31st. I just haven't gone through the process of formally asking to be re-upped. I will do that. So mine's also coming up for renewal May 31st.
Oh, do we have to make you step out?
I know. I sit in a corner and never say anything.
Probably a bad day to be asking.
To make the rest of us look good. So it's okay.
Ellen?
Kevin, my first term expires May 31st, and I've already contacted Teller County, the Teller County administration to ask the county commissioners if they want me to continue, and I've been told not to expect to have anybody else warm my seat for the next 3 years. But they're working on it. They're looking
Okay.
around.
Great.
So you know.
PPACG sends letters to your member governments, or to your appointing governments at the same time. So, Hal, you just need to let them know.
Okay.
They've probably gotten a letter from us, or will soon, saying that they need to reappoint you or choose someone else.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. State legislation update.
Good afternoon, Rachel Beck, Policy and Communication Manager, in case you forgot. Some quick updates. We're about halfway through this session now, and so we're starting to see bills move through the process. There's a number that you probably noticed in this latest version of the tracker that you received by email. This section at the end here of bills passed or killed is getting an awful lot longer than it has been so far. Yeah. How's that? How's that? That's the pertinent information, right?
There are seats in the front.
We're going to start providing binoculars with your appointments. House Bill 161018, that's the one concerning Transportation Advisory Committee procedures and allowing the State Transportation Advisory Committee to advise that group directly, was signed by the governor, so that will become law.
That's not up here. Okay.
Now I'm going to make you seasick now that it's this big. 1138, which the board took a formal position to support, was killed in committee. That is the one that would extend the window to 5 full years in which excess general funds could be transferred to transportation projects. I'm not sure this group was even able to talk about that bill because it happened so quickly. This was one that we saw last year in basically the same format, and it died last year as well. So we'll talk about some other options for transportation funding in a minute.
Where was that killed?
In committee, and
Senate or the House?
that was in the House. House 1205, which the board opposed, as did this group, that's the one regarding motorcycle lane splitting, also died in committee. I think you've already heard an update on Senate Bill 11 that would repeal faster funding to transit.
Yeah, that had gotten through already.
Okay. I apologize. I give this update to some PPACG group or other every week, and I forget who I've told what, so stop me if I'm repeating myself. There were both House and Senate versions of an end-of-life options bill sponsored by Michael Merrifield for terminally ill patients. There's one version right there. And both of those have now been postponed indefinitely, but he is now working on an effort to take that directly to the voters and expects to have that on this November's ballot. So this is another one that we've seen in several forms, not just here in Colorado, but in other states. And so you'll get to decide on that one yourself in the fall. A new bill since the last time we talked is House 1286. That would increase the income tax deduction for wildfire mitigation measures that homeowners perform on their individual properties. There was a bill that came out really early in the session that the board voted to support. I believe it was this one, yes, 1052, that would make that a tax credit instead of a tax deduction. The legislature is really looking for ways to encourage people to do this themselves on their own properties. Obviously, this is a huge risk to our communities, but it's very expensive to address, and so various local bodies are looking for ways to encourage people to do this individually. So this version, the previous version, died pretty quickly because it had a very large fiscal note. So this new bill, 1286, is an attempt at a different way of providing that incentive without maybe costing the state quite so much money. Have we talked about House Bill 1303 that concerns rural transportation authorities? This is a rather controversial one in the community. We've been expecting something of this nature related to a property that was annexed by Fountain on South Academy and I-25. It's been developed as a shopping center anchored by Walmart and Sam's Club. And there is litigation that those parties brought against the PPRTA and the State Department of Revenue, which collects PPRTA tax, about whether the property is still subject to that tax or not.
Can you get to that place on your...
Yes, but sorry, now that it's so big, it's a lot harder to find them. There we go. So as you can see by the red highlight there, the PPRTA board took a position of opposition to this one. What it proposes is that property that is vacant and annexed by a non-member jurisdiction and had previously not generated any sales tax proposes prohibiting an RTA from levying sales tax on that property. It's a pretty short one, as you can see. And staff analysis is that there's an awful lot of missing pieces and unanswered questions in this bill that are of concern. And so for that reason, and because of the pending litigation, the board chose to take a position of opposition on this. The Regional Business Alliance has also taken a position of opposing, as has the Special District Association, because there's questions about whether this would have implications for other kinds of special districts.
Who's the sponsor?
Lois Landgraf, who represents Fountain. Other questions or comments on that one before we move on?
What's its status?
This has a hearing scheduled for next Wednesday. There will be a number of local board members and others who are planning to testify against it.
I can speak to the Regional Business Alliance position and why they took a position on this one, and it was more in that introducing this bill as a point of legislation to kind of short circuit the litigation. We would probably have not weighed in had it on the litigation itself, and that being between the cities and RTA, PPRTA. However, so the business community did step in on this one and say, you know, we don't support this as a legislative action, and it sets kind of a dangerous precedent for how they might resolve other annexation disagreements in the future. So that's why we engaged on this one, and will likely go to testify. So.
Also,
Yes. Yes.
Just
It was really one project, to introduce state law that would have other implications seemed overreaching.
and just
Yes.
as a piece of background, this was in El Paso County jurisdiction for zoning, which was subject to then the sales tax, PPRTA, and then subsequently annexed to Fountain, which is not. And so that's why there's a question here. So for people who didn't know that.
The PPRTA's position is that the voters approved a regional transportation authority and a geographic boundary, and the transportation planning was done accordingly to cover the entire region. And so to start annexing out pieces, and in this particular case, that property could not have been developed except for $25 million in PPRTA improvements. That jeopardizes the PPRTA's ability to deliver those projects that were chosen by and promised to the voters. I will note, of course, that Fountain is one of our member governments, and they have a different perspective.
They also have their own tax,
Disclaimer.
their own sales tax for transportation.
This has presented terrible problems for Pikes Peak Community College at that intersection. You've got students running across to Walmart, running across that speedway there, and people from Walmart, students parking at Walmart, running across the street to go to college. I mean, it's pretty much a zoo.
The last bill I'll note before I speak a little more generally is House 1304. And this is an interesting one that proposes that each transportation planning region in the state would have a public meeting to discuss specific transportation projects, what are the priorities in each region, and how citizens would like to fund them, which is a great intention. The board, as you can see, has taken a position of opposing this bill because there are a number of very specific provisions in the bill on when this meeting would happen, who would need to be there, what the reporting process would be, which includes all of these representatives who are hosting the meeting have to send a report up to Denver, and then the CDOT director has to give that report to the legislature. All this for one public meeting, and then this would direct, in theory, what our transportation priorities and funding would look like. The board felt that this was duplicative of a lot of the public processes that our individual member governments, as well as PPACG as the regional planning organization, already have in place. They were concerned about those specifics, and they were also concerned that that would give the legislature a role in choosing projects and making funding decisions that they don't currently have, and that could get a bit sticky. Questions or comments on that one? The last thing I want to update you on is transportation funding options, which I mentioned earlier. This is a topic of great interest here at PPACG, other places, and in the state. You've heard various proposals over recent years on how to put more money into our transportation system because we keep falling behind. One of the more recent is the reclassification of the hospital provider fee. There have been a number of wrinkles in that discussion this session, and the latest that I'm hearing is that may not come to the legislature this year at all. It has been introduced. Okay, I heard wrong. Thank you, Hannah. There's another coalition of several groups, including the Colorado Contractors Association, that has also released, I believe, 10 different versions of possible ballot initiatives that voters would decide on a statewide sales tax that would fund transportation. The different components are things like whether 10% would be dedicated to transit, whether it has a sunset, how much money would go to administration. I know Hannah's quite familiar with this, so please chime in. If money would have to be spent in every transportation planning region in the state on a 3-year basis, things like that. So stay tuned on which of those 10 options actually comes to the ballot. And I believe that their goal is to put that on this November's ballot. Is that right, Hannah?
What is the percent they're talking about?
It's 0.62 on $10 purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Say that again.
0.62 on what?
A $10 purchase.
So it's 0.0, well, what? So move the 0 to
0.06.
divide by.
Right.
Okay.
That's
Go up to $10 a little bit.
Okay.
Other questions, comments, other bills you want to talk about?
Is there anything new on this rainwater storage, rain drums, et cetera, et cetera?
You know, I haven't checked that one in a while. Let's just
That was
look it up.
actually- Yeah, it was very
Oh,
confusing.
thank you.
It was very confusing. There was an article in the paper, but
That one is another one that we've seen several versions of.
We should vote on that one, too.
The interesting thing about this year's version is that it required utilities to come up with supplemental water plans that would replace the water that was theoretically captured from downstream users in rain barrels. And that was a big sticking point, as you can imagine.
okay.
Anything else?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Any additional items for the next CAC meeting, which is scheduled for April 27th? Hearing none. Any member announcements?
I'm gonna add one in.
Courtney?
I just wanted to let you guys know it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but if you're representing the city of Colorado Springs, we recently took on the Age-Friendly City Initiative, and I'm sitting on the Transportation Committee. So our intent, I guess, over the next month and a half is to put together 3 to 5 goals and then objectives within those to improve transportation options for aging adults. So if that's something that you have any interest in or feedback on, feel free to get in touch and we can pass that on. But I think it'll be pretty exciting. Jan Martin is kind of coordinating all of these little pieces, and hopefully well, it was interesting. She had a great slide that showed priorities of the boomer generation and priorities of millennials, and they reflect each other almost exactly in a lot of really interesting ways. So I think it's good for everybody. But yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts on that.
Mr. Baker?
Welling Clark is very good at talking about why he's missing and bringing up points that he would have otherwise brought up at the meeting. Did he have anything to say for this meeting?
He said he wasn't, the last I saw is that he wasn't going to be here and that he was going to send us something. But I did not see anything. Anything else? Item number 12 is please note that the meeting schedule for PPACG, which is in the back of your packets. And without hearing anything else, we stand adjourned.
Good job.
Thank you.